Welcome to my channel. Today we're diving into the mind-bending sci-fi thriller, The Slingshot, a film that explores the haunting effects of isolation, hallucination, and the fragile line between reality and delusion. What starts as a mission to Titan slowly unravels into a psychological nightmare where one man's grip on truth slips away inside the cold, silent corridors of deep space. Get ready for a suspenseful journey that will keep you guessing till the very end. The story opens with John, one of the astronauts, waking up from deep sleep aboard the spacecraft named the Resilient One, currently en route to Titan. He is disoriented but quickly starts regaining his senses. This mission employs a special technique known as the Slingshot, which uses Saturn's gravitational pull to dramatically boost the ship's speed, reducing the duration of their journey. Alongside John are two other crew members, Captain Frank and Nash. The mission is structured so that all three rotate between periods of deep cryogenic sleep and short waking intervals, roughly 90 days of sleep, followed by a couple of days awake. This process helps conserve food and supplies, while also ensuring the systems on board the ship are monitored periodically. By the time we enter the story, the crew is already halfway through their journey. However, the effects of repeated deep sleep are beginning to show, especially on John. Upon waking, he feels weak and confused, so much so that he struggles to remember his girlfriend's last name. Her name is Zoe Morgan, and she played a significant role in his past in the mission's research team. Captain Frank and Nash also awaken and proceed with their daily routines, exercising, eating, showering, and running diagnostic checks on the ship. John remains disturbed by the lingering effects of cryosleep, but during a routine radio systems check, his memory sharpens, and he finally recalls Zoe's full name. The film unfolds across two timelines, one in the present during the space voyage, and the other in the past before the mission began. In that earlier timeline, we see John and Zoe meet for the first time. She, too, was a scientist deeply involved in the research for the mission. They grew close while working together, and though Zoe fell in love with John, he ultimately chose the mission over their relationship. Now, as he drifts through space, he's haunted by memories of what he left behind and begins to regret his decision. Before departure, the astronauts were warned about the potential side effects of the drugs used to induce deep sleep. So when John begins experiencing these emotional and cognitive issues, he attributes them to that. Still, the homesickness and emotional burden grow. The team sends a delayed message back to Houston, aware that they are now too far from Earth to maintain direct communication. John's words make it clear he misses Earth dearly. With their system checks complete, the crew prepares to return to sleep. Another 90 days in the dark, unconscious and vulnerable, drifting ever closer to Titan. When John wakes up again, he starts hearing strange sounds. Suddenly, something goes wrong inside the ship. A panel breaks loose and hits him in the head, knocking him unconscious. When he regains consciousness, Captain Frank and Nash are already awake. They informed him that he was the first to wake up and must have seen what happened. However, they still have no idea what the spacecraft might have collided with. A full systems check is run, but no major errors are found. Nash appears increasingly anxious. He fears that during the Slingshot maneuver, the ship may not withstand the immense pressure and could be destroyed in a catastrophic failure. Captain Frank, a stern and pragmatic leader, shows little concern. He doesn't like Nash and believes Nash is too quick to panic. The captain questions John, asking him if the system diagnostics confirm their readiness for the Slingshot. John responds affirmatively. The ship should be able to handle the maneuver. Despite Nash's concerns, Captain Frank decides not to change course. They've already come too far, and returning to Earth at this point would be nearly impossible. Nash insists the ship has sustained damage and pleads that they turn back before it's too late, but Captain Frank stands firm. He argues that if they return and it turns out the ship wasn't significantly damaged, they'll be blamed for mission failure. He's unwilling to take that risk. For him, the mission must go on. With no support from the captain, Nash secretly approaches John. He proposes a mutiny. The plan is to reprogram their sleep pods to wake them up 12 hours before the captain's next scheduled awakening. During that time, they'll alter the Slingshot calculations to change the ship's trajectory, redirecting it back toward Earth. Initially, John refuses, disturbed by the idea of betraying protocol and going against direct orders. What they were planning wasn't just sabotage, it was rebellion. Unbeknownst to them, Captain Frank has been monitoring everything from the ship's bridge. Nash eventually convinces John to join the plan. John agrees and hands over his access code to help execute it. They both re-enter deep sleep, now set to wake up ahead of schedule. But the longer they remain in cryosleep, the worse their side effects become. Their bodies feel weaker, limbs fail to respond properly, and their minds begin to fracture. John even starts hallucinating Zoe, seeing her appear beside him in fleeting, haunting visions. Despite these physical and mental challenges, Nash is thrilled. He believes that with the captain still asleep, they can alter the ship's direction in time. As they approach Saturn, the crew is awestruck by the planet's magnificent view. Nash prepares to adjust the trajectory calculations, but John suddenly changes his mind. A heated argument breaks out between them. At that very moment, Captain Frank enters the control room. He had already altered his sleep cycle after discovering their plan. His unexpected arrival shocks both men. Nash, now visibly shaken, realizes the captain no longer trusts him. The captain whispers something into Nash's ear. Whatever it was, it terrifies him, and he silently returns to work. Earlier, Nash had told John a chilling story about a remote Antarctic research station called TOR. In that station, a group of scientists was trapped and wanted to evacuate, but their captain refused to allow it. Eventually, when the crew disobeyed orders, the captain killed them all. Now Nash fears the same fate awaits them. Captain Frank, however, sees through Nash's panic. He knows that, unlike Nash, John is not a coward. Captain Frank realized that John wasn't as desperate to return home as Nash was, and that made him someone he could trust, or at least work with. So he extended a hand of friendship. Even without Nash, the mission could still be completed. One day, John considered fixing the damage to the ship, but the thought alone filled him with dread. What if he got sucked into space? The fear kept him from acting, and soon it was time to return to deep sleep. 90 days later, when they woke up, John's condition had deteriorated further. Nash, too, was descending into madness, while Captain Frank remained strong, unshaken, unafraid, and resolute in seeing the mission through. At one point, the captain saw John running through the ship, chasing Zoe. But Zoe wasn't there. She never was. It was another hallucination. The captain calmly told him, "Zoe isn't here," and John froze. He was stunned. He had only ever spoken to Nash about Zoe. How did the captain know? Meanwhile, Nash spent his time in the recreation room, completely unhinged, muttering that they were all going to die out there. John approached him and asked the one thing that had been bothering him. "Did you tell the captain about me and Zoe?" Nash denied it, but seemed completely absorbed by something else. He kept rambling about errors in the navigation data, saying they might never even reach Titan. John took Nash's tablet, hoping to see what he meant, but it was blank. There were no numbers, no calculations. Just like John, Nash had begun hallucinating. He was no longer seeing reality. He was making strange noises, speaking nonsense, a man unraveling at the seams. The two of them eventually made their way to the bridge, where Captain Frank was already waiting. He asked Nash for his report. Nash insisted the system had been compromised and begged that they turn back. The captain admitted he had already checked, and it was true. The ship's power levels had dropped by 20%. Then he turned to John and asked his opinion, but John had nothing substantial to add. That's when the captain dropped the real bombshell. This wasn't just a malfunction, it was sabotage. Someone had intentionally introduced the error into the system, and the last login had been done using John's access code. John was stunned. "I didn't do it," he said, confused and alarmed. The captain confirmed it. John didn't, but Nash did, and John had given Nash his code. According to the captain, Nash was trying to sabotage the mission. Then something even more shocking happened. Captain Frank pulled out a gun, a firearm aboard a spacecraft, an unthinkable risk. Even John was taken aback. "How do you even have a gun on this ship?" he asked. The captain replied calmly, "We anticipated this kind of threat. I have to complete this mission, no matter what." He ordered both John and Nash to return to their sleep pods immediately. They obeyed. John entered his pod first, but before falling asleep, he saw something horrifying. Captain Frank had killed Nash. 9 months later, John awoke again, physically weakened and mentally exhausted. But his first thought wasn't about himself, it was about Nash. He began searching for him, but only found the captain. "Where's Nash?" he asked. "I put him to sleep," the captain said almost too calmly. "He lost sight of the mission, but I believe you haven't. You and we're still friends, right?" Then the captain told him the real story about the tour station, the Antarctic base that Nash had described. According to Nash, the captain had killed everyone, but Frank claimed Nash had lied. In Frank's version, the scientists turned on their captain and murdered him. They lost control. The captain had tried to save them. John, still trying to understand the truth, asked the captain about the autopsy reports. Why did they show everyone had died from gunshot wounds? The captain calmly replied that those people had taken their own lives. Somehow his words convinced John enough to keep him aligned with the mission. But something had shifted. During a routine system check, John suddenly felt a strange sensation in his right hand. It began to swell unnaturally to the point that it looked like it would burst. But it wasn't real, just another terrifying hallucination that had plagued him from the beginning. The episode left him deeply shaken. Later, when Captain VJ asked if something was wrong, John kept quiet. The captain then said what John feared most. "Zoe is not on this ship." John didn't want to talk about Zoe at all, but the captain pressed further. "What happened between you and Zoe? It wasn't real. She was never who you thought she was. She was an employee hired by the committee to assess your emotional fitness. This whole thing was a test." According to the captain, NASA would never risk such an expensive mission by handing it to someone unstable. They needed to know if John could be trusted. The moment shattered John's world. He couldn't believe it. He accused the captain of lying, of manipulating him. But the captain reminded him, every moment with Zoe, every encounter, was too convenient to be a coincidence. Their meetings had all been staged. Zoe's presence in his life had been carefully orchestrated, and now it all made sense. Painfully so. The captain tried to calm John down. He told him that the mission had to take precedence over everything else. If John lost control the way Nash had, they'd all be doomed. John, barely holding it together, agreed. During a radio check, he heard what sounded like Houston on the other end. Desperate, he told them everything. But when he returned to the bridge, the captain showed him security footage. John had been speaking to himself the entire time. No one was on the other end of the transmission. His hallucinations were worsening. Now the captain carried his gun everywhere, not because he wanted to harm John, but because he no longer trusted him. Still, he tried one last time to reason with him. "This mission depends on the two of us. That's it. Now it's time to sleep again. When we wake up, we'll be on Titan." John agreed. The captain insisted he sleep first. Slowly, John walked forward. But then, in a flash, he locked himself inside one of the chambers. He had only one goal: to see Nash, to confirm whether he was alive or not. The captain warned him, I can't wake him, but if you want to see him, go ahead. So John stepped into the sleeping chamber, and then suddenly, John attacked the captain. A violent struggle broke out between them. In the chaos, John managed to snatch the gun and severely injure the captain, leaving him unconscious on the floor. Rushing to the bridge, John searched the system for Nash's location. To his shock, the system reported that Nash was already on the bridge. Confused, John ran a confirmation check, and that's when the devastating truth was revealed. Only one person had been sent on this mission: Captain Frank Nash. At that moment, memories began flooding back. John realized that the entire time he had been hallucinating both the captain and Nash. They were nothing more than fabrications of his deteriorating mind. Desperate, John used the radio again, and this time he heard Zoe's voice. She calmly explained that before the mission, John had been placed inside a simulation. He wasn't in space at all. A freak accident had caused the ship to be buried deep underground, but rescue efforts were already underway. Zoe urged him to unlock the airlock and exit. He'd be back on the surface in no time. John clung to those words like hope itself. As he moved toward the airlock, the captain regained consciousness. Wounded and desperate, the captain pleaded with John not to open the door. He insisted they were still in space, and that stepping outside meant certain death. But John refused to believe him. He was convinced Zoe was right. Locking the airlock behind him, John stepped outside. At first, it appeared to be true. The terrain looked like Earth. He was rising to the surface, slowly, as if finally escaping. But then, he remembered something Zoe had said, and in that flash of clarity, he realized the horrifying truth. He was still in space. In the next moment, he drifted into the void, his body floating lifelessly among the stars. Zoe was never real. There had never been an affair. She had only been part of an evaluation program designed to monitor his mental state. The captain had been right all along. Nash had gone mad. And in the end, so had John. Now only the captain remained, alone on a malfunctioning ship with no one left to help him. And as the final systems failed, it became clear that he too wouldn't survive. And with that, the story of the Slingshot comes to a chilling end. Thanks for watching this recap of the Slingshot. If you enjoyed the story and want to see more awesome movie breakdowns, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Also, drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think about this movie. Until next time, take care and keep watching great films.